not look so different from Scotland?
Aye, they are sisters.
The title of the movie, Mary, Queen of Scots, has been chosen over the definition Mary, Queen of Scotland, as an excellent example of how the British and Germanic cultures tend to emphasize how sovereigns belong to their people before belonging to their kingdoms. For this reason, for example, Elizabeth I Tudor, the so-called Virgin Queen, always declared to reject the idea of having a husband because she wanted to marry her people, not her throne. This consideration may puzzle all of us, modern spectators of politicians who seem determined just to marry their seat. The protagonist of the movie is the Catholic Mary Stuart, not to be mistaken for Bloody Mary, Elizabeth's stepsister, who sat on the English throne after her father, Henry VIII. Mary of Scotland, on the contrary, is a woman of feminine grace, full of compassion, returned from a sort of exile in France, strongly faithful to a so-called enlightened Catholicism. She represents the perfect counterpart of the very well-known Elizabeth I, Queen of England, Wales and Ireland. They were both women, both charismatic. One was a Stuart and the other was a Tudor. One was Catholic and legitimate, and the other Anglican and illegitimate, both ready to give up a major part of themselves in order to protect their own crown and the lineage of the throne of England. Therefore, the movie displays a totally feminine overview, which is seen from two opposite perspectives. On one side, there is Elizabeth, accepted at this point as a necessary evil by a male chauvinism in the English court. She is ready to be the king that her nation needs, even if it means giving up her own fertility, the taint of her sex, in order to be strong in a role of sovereign. On the other side, Mary, remarkably womanly, maybe even too naive at the beginning of the movie, but very soon mature and fertile, willing to sacrifice her own personal dignity to convert her womb to the cradle of her dynasty. Both of them are capable of strong love. On one side, it is strangled by Elizabeth in order to be able to wear the crown of the king, as she used to say. On the other side, it is experienced by Mary to the point of facing humiliation at the hands of those who have taken advantage of her. Both queens are beautiful. Similar, at least until the smallpox disfigures Elizabeth, who will choose to hide herself behind makeup and wigs, looking perhaps less human and more iconic. However, behind that mask, it is possible to sense her fragility, which is seldom ascribed to the English queen. We perceive a moving weakness while she looks at the newborn foal in the royal studs and collects part of her gown in front of her womb, in order to watch her own shadow on the ground and linger in an illusion of pregnancy. The illusion to be a woman, according to the concept of femininity of her era, which was often identified with the mere procreation. On the other side, Mary proved herself successful in giving birth to the heir to the throne of Scotland and England, in spite of the degradation of her marriage with Lord Darnley. The direction of Josie Rourke pictures a very metaphorical and poetic association of images that may seem a little rough, but also extremely meaningful and allegoric. While Mary sits on the ground after a painful labor, with the colors of her childbirth between her own spread-out legs, Elizabeth finds herself in the same position, but in front of her there are the red paper flowers that she creates obsessively as the only replacement for the fertile season of their womb that was extinguished even before starting to bloom. In the strong rivalry between the two queens, in the political violence, in the envy and the fight, the element that finally emerges is the respect, the deep understanding between two women at the mirror, ready to confront each other, slightly afraid to reveal themselves, as if each one was the reverse reflection of the other. At this point, it is the powerful Elizabeth who seems more worried about showing herself in front of her desperate and dethroned cousin. The Queen of England looks paradoxically scared of measuring up to Mary's qualities. The former Queen of Scots, who apparently had everything from both a political and familiar point of view, is now deprived of everything, but she won't be lacking pride and dignity. On the other hand, Elizabeth has finally given up her feminine traits to the point of becoming a grotesque sculpture of power. By that, she demonstrates that, for the moment, only this kind of woman, a male woman, can aspire to true supremacy. Nevertheless, beneath her chalk mask, the Queen cries. The Queen who is forced to put her cousin to death for treason. The Queen who orders the execution of the woman who represented everything she had sacrificed for the throne. The Queen cries. She cries for Mary, who walks towards the executioner's block, lonely, while the men around move backwards and watch her with respect and maybe a little fear, while she makes her last symbolic gesture of showing a red dress before facing the death. Red. Red like the bloodshed. Red like a symbol of martyrdom. Red like the Rose of England. Red like Elizabeth's paper flowers. Red like the air of the two queens. Two types of loneliness. Two icons that are romanticized by the movie and turned into uniform interpretations of life and power. But they are also developed in a three-dimensional way, which allows us to forgive the historical inaccuracies, the naiveties, the moments similar to a fairy tale, the representation of the courts that seems more functional to the message than to realism. However, in spite of a slightly uncertain and implausible beginning, the depth of the storytelling gets more and more emotional, sometimes rough, almost constantly enriched by a subtext that can be considered quite easy to read, at least partially, even for those who aren't familiar with the symbolism that surrounds the British monarchy. All of us who have studied and loved it since forever are aware that we call it history, but we can't give up the legend and the almost supernatural charm of the human archetype.
Should you murder me, remember you murder your sister. And you murder your queen.